Greetings, NSA Hampton Roads. XO Commander Nelson here for this week's video series. I'm joined with Chief Graham, the AOIC of Northwest Annex, to discuss this week. Chief, we've been working through COVID for the last 8 to 9 months. What are some of the things and concerns you've been hearing from the deck police?
Sir, one of the major concerns I'm hearing from my sailors is being able to go on leave with the current uptick with the counties and the states being red, sir.
That's a pretty interesting concern, and one that we're really focused on, especially as we're coming into the holiday season. And that's pretty timely, though, because we just updated our leave policy. So as you're talking to your sailors, what are some of the things you're telling them about the leave policy?
So, sir, one of the things I'm explaining to them how this one differs from our last one is that this one is more risk-based, meaning it's more onus on the sailor and their responsibilities and what they're going to do while they're on leave and who they're around and what those around them are going to do as far as taking care of themselves and protecting themselves from COVID, sir.
Okay. So when we talk about risk-based, can you explain that part a little bit more? So I know before we couldn't travel if we went only to a red area or only by plane. But we got a little bit more flexibility this time.
Yes, sir. So a lot more flexibility. Just alone in the travel itinerary and risk level assessment form, sir, it allows for us to go in and actually write what it is that we're doing. For instance, I'm going home to D.C. I'm going to be with my grandmother and my father. My father wears his mask because my grandmother has a pre-existing condition. There's no other personnel coming into our household during that time that I'm on leave. My mode of travel is going to be POV, so that lessens my exposure from here to DC. And also, at the end of it, it totals up that number from my travel, what I'm going to be doing with my family, and also the current HP con, and that's how that risk is determined.
Okay, appreciate that. And I noticed, we've added a couple extra steps this time. How do you feel about the ability to get to that information?
Sir, it's pretty good. One of the questions is, why are there two websites instead of one?
Well, as we're looking at COVID and the responses and understanding all the resources, we've learned a lot of great websites and tools that we can use to help assess. We had been using a couple different ones, and one of the ones that we're continuing to use is a Harvard county-by-county map.
Sir.
And I think that provides a really great snapshot of what that risk level is for that location. However, it doesn't necessarily capture the trends. It doesn't capture those other stats that kind of help round out the picture. And the analogy I've been using with a lot of our sailors is, it's kind of like looking at sports. We can think that the Steelers are a really good team because they're 7-0, but we got to look at the rest of the stats to figure out, right? So it's not just one stat that's going to tell us the whole picture for travel, whether or not that's a safe decision. But just because something is a red area doesn't necessarily mean that it's a no-go completely. So to look at a couple other stats there.
Okay. And sir, another question would be, for instance, church. So we know during COVID and in Charlie we couldn't go to church. It was more so streamed live, whereas that now in Bravo we're allowed to. But church is still considered high risk. However, with this new format here, allowing us to put the number of personnel that are allowed in the church, what the social distancing measures are, the fact that we're wearing masks and singing out aloud isn't allowed in the church. With that taken into consideration, does that lessen us from church being high risk into moving more into the moderate?
Right, and one of the things we've done, and Fleet Force has put out some great guidelines for how to assess what those risk levels are. Every situation is going to be slightly different. And so as you look at different activities that are on that far right, the highest risk activities, a lot of that risk is dependent on the number of people, the ability to wear a mask, whether it's indoors, outdoors. And as you start to change some of those details, it lessens that risk. And so we're using that as a guideline, but we're asking for more detailed questions in order to really get a better idea of what that risk might be. And so it may be that it's a high-risk activity, but it may be that it can be mitigated. And so we're asking all the sailors to capture that information on the leave chit request so that we can make a better determination on whether that risk is truly that high or whether it can be mitigated.
Yes, sir. And the last question, sir, I think this one is really important. When it comes to holiday stand down and the ability to roam, with a larger number of the command gone at one time, what is going to be the final determination for the sailor coming back if they can't ROM?
So as we're looking ahead, to the holidays period, our goal is to make sure that folks do get a chance to take leave, whether that's local or outside the local area. It's important that they take time to recharge and come back ready to complete the mission. We recognize that some of the departments are going to have a little bit more difficult time supporting the ROM, but that's why we have this process set up so that the supervisors can provide recommendations on whether or not ROM, one, is required, and two, if they can support it from a mission standpoint. But like I said, just because an area might be red doesn't necessarily mean that ROM is required. We're going to look at the total picture. And just because a ROM recommendation may be made for that specific leave request doesn't mean that leave can't be taken elsewhere or doing other activities or other modes of travel, and so that we can come up with safe guidelines to take leave. So I appreciate the questions today, Chief. I expect that we're going to have a lot of questions as we come into the holiday season. I encourage our sailors, if they do have more questions, to please ask your chief, ask your chain of command. We want to make sure that sailors have an opportunity to take time to recharge, and so please ask questions if you have them. Thanks for joining us today, Chief. As a friendly reminder every week, wash your hands, wear your mask, XOL.